Welcome to Mind Lepic. Here, in the quiet hours of night, we drift slowly into the past, to a time when days moved gently and nights were made for rest. If this peaceful story feels right for you tonight, please press like, and if you enjoy these calm journeys, consider subscribing, so more gentle tales can find their way to your evenings, wherever you are listening from. Perhaps a city in the United States, a village in the United Kingdom, a quiet home in Canada, or somewhere else entirely. Please leave a short comment below telling me your city or country. I read every one, and it makes these late-night moments feel shared. Now, let the day fall away. Dim the lights if you can. Settle deeper into your pillows. Let your shoulders soften. Breathe slowly. In and out. Tonight we travel back more than 600 years to a small thatched cottage on the edge of a winter wood in the heart of medieval England. The year does not matter much. The snow does. The hearth does. The slow rhythm of simple days does. Part 1. The first snow of the season had begun in the night. Very fine flakes, almost powder, drifting past the tiny horn window that was covered inside with a thin layer of frost. Inside the cottage, the air smelled of wood smoke, dried lavender hanging from the rafters, and the faint sweetness of the last apples stored in the corner. A low fire lived in the open hearth at the center of the single room. The flames moved without. Hurry! Small yellow tongues, licking slowly at a thick log of oak that had been split by hand many weeks before. Sparks rose now and then, floated upward, then disappeared into the dark throat of the chimney. The woman of the cottage, called Aelith, sat on a low stool close to the warmth. Her woolen kirtle was the color of wet slate, patched many times at the elbows and hem. Over it she wore a heavier mantle of undyed wool, the edges frayed from years of brushing against stone walls and muddy paths. She turned a wooden spindle between her fingers. The wool on the distaff was pale gray, almost the same shade as the sky outside. The thread she drew out was thin and even. Slow work, done without rush. Every few minutes she paused to feed another small stick to the fire. The new wood hissed softly as the dampness left it, then settled into the same calm burning as the rest. Beyond the wattle and daub walls, the wind moved through the bare branches of the oak and ash trees. It sounded far away, a long, low breath that rose and fell like someone sleeping. Snowflakes tapped very lightly against the thatch. Tiny, patient taps that added another thin white layer to the roof. Aelith's husband, Godwin, had gone out at first light to check the snares along the wood's edge and to bring back more firewood. He would be some time yet. The snow made every step careful. On the rush mat near the hearth slept their old brindled hound, Edric. His breathing was deep and slow. One ear twitched now and then when a log cracked or when the wind sighed, especially long against the eaves. His paws sometimes moved a little, as though in his dream he walked once more through summer grass. Above the hearth hung a string of onions and a small bunch of dried thyme. Their shadows swayed gently on the smoky beams whenever the flames rose higher. For a moment, Aelith set the spindle aside. She rose slowly, smoothing her skirts with the flat of her hands. From a wooden chest near the wall she took a thick candle of beeswax. Her treasure, saved for the darkest months. She carried it to the small shelf beside the window, set it in its iron pricket, and touched a thin splinter of wood to the fire until it glowed. With that glow she lit the wick. The new flame stood straight and calm. Its light reached farther than the hearth's red glow, touching the rough plaster, the folded blankets on the pallet bed, the small wooden bowl that waited on the trestle table. She stood a moment looking at the candle, Then she looked at the window. Outside, the snow fell thicker now, soft, steady, without wind to scatter it. The world beyond the panes had turned white and quiet. The path to the wood was already disappearing. The low stone wall that marked their small croft was softening at the edges, becoming part of the field. Aelith returned to her stool. She picked up the spindle again. The wheel of wool turned once, twice, 3 times. The thread grew longer by the smallest measure. The fire spoke in little pops and sighs. The hound dreamed on. The snow kept falling. Everything moved slowly. Everything was waiting for night to deepen, for the door to open, for the sound of boots being stamped free of snow, for the quiet voice of a man who had walked through winter to come home. The candle flame stood steady now, its small golden pool spreading across the rough wooden shelf. Aelith watched it for a long moment. The light caught the tiny crystals of frost on the inside of the horn pane and turned them into faint stars. She returned to the low stool. The spindle rested in her lap again. She drew out another length of wool. Slowly, carefully, the fiber slipped between her fingers like water over stones. The twist traveled upward, neat and even. She let the spindle drop and spin freely for a few turns before catching it once more. The rhythm was old. Breathe in. Draw the thread. Breathe out. Let the spindle turn. Breathe in. Draw again. The same motion her mother had taught her beside another hearth, long ago when the cottage still belonged to her parents. Outside, the snow continued without sound. It gathered on the thatch in soft, rounded drifts. It weighted the bare branches until they bent low. It covered the frozen ruts in the path so that tomorrow's footprints would be the first to mark the white ground. Edric stirred. He lifted his head, blinked once at the fire, then lowered his muzzle again onto his paws. A small sigh escaped him. Warm breath that rose in a faint cloud before vanishing. His tail gave one slow thump against the rushes. Aelith smiled without moving her lips. She reached down and rested her hand on the hound's broad back. The coarse hair was warm from the fire. She felt the slow rise and fall of his ribs. Steady, unhurried. From the far corner came the faint rustle of straw. Beneath the pallet bed, a hen had tucked herself for the night. She had slipped in through the door at dusk, as she always did when the cold deepened, and now she slept with her head under one wing. Only the softest cluck sounded now and then. Half dream, half contentment. The fire settled lower. A log broke in two with a gentle crack. Red coals glowed brighter for a heartbeat, then dimmed again to a quiet orange. Aelith leaned forward. With the tip of a long iron poker, she nudged the split pieces closer together. Sparks rose in a small, silent fountain. She watched them climb, then fade. She rose once more. Her shadow moved large and slow across the walls as she crossed to the wooden chest. She lifted the lid. Inside lay folded linens, a spare blanket of heavy frieze wool, and a small bundle wrapped in clean cloth. She took the bundle out and carried it back to the fireside. Kneeling, she unwrapped it carefully. Inside were 3 small oat cakes, baked 2 days before on the bakestone. Their edges were crisp, their centers still soft. Beside them lay a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in dock leaves, and a single winter apple. Small, green gold, its skin wrinkled but sweet beneath. She set the food on the trestle table. Godwin would be hungry when he returned. The snares might hold a rabbit or 2, but the cold made game scarce and slow to move. Better to have something warm waiting. Aelith took the apple in her hands. She turned it slowly. The candlelight found a faint blush of red on one cheek. She pressed it to her nose. The scent was sharp and clean, reminding her of the orchard in autumn, of baskets carried home under a low sun. She set it down again beside the oat cakes. The wind rose for a moment outside. It moved along the eaves, lifting a few loose ends of thatch. A soft patter of snow slid from the roof and thumped quietly onto the frozen ground below. Then the wind fell quiet again. The night returned to its long, even breathing. Aelith sat once more. She picked up the spindle. The wool waited. The thread waited. She began again. Draw, twist, drop, catch. Draw, twist, drop, catch. The candle burned lower by the smallest amount. The fire spoke in whispers. The hound dreamed of fields he had not seen in years. The hen shifted once under the bed, then settled deeper. And still the snow fell, steady, silent, covering the world in white peace. The candle had burned down until its flame sat low in a small pool of clear wax. The wick curled slightly, and the light flickered once, softly, before steadying again. Shadows lengthened on the beams overhead, then shrank back as the flame found its balance. Aelith paused her spinning. She set the spindle carefully on the rushes beside her stool so the thread would not tangle. She rubbed her hands together slowly. The wool had left them slightly oily, and the warmth from the fire made her palms tingle. She stood and walked the few steps to the door. The latch was a simple wooden bar that dropped into iron hooks. She lifted it quietly. Cold air slipped in at once, sharp, clean, carrying the scent of snow and pine. She opened the door only a hand's width. Outside, the night was thick with falling white. The flakes moved straight down, no wind to drive them sideways. They caught the faint glow from the open door and glittered for an instant before settling onto the already deep layer on the ground. The path to the wood had vanished completely. Only the dark shapes of trees stood out. Tall, patient, their branches heavy with new snow. Aelith closed the door again. The latch dropped back into place with a small wooden clunk. The cold that had entered lingered near the threshold for a moment, then slowly warmed and disappeared into the room's gentle heat. She returned to the hearth. With the poker, she raked the coals into a tighter heap. She laid 2 more small logs across them, dry hazel branches saved from autumn. They caught at once. Tiny flames danced along the bark, crackling faintly, then settled into a steady burn. The new heat rose in waves that brushed her face like warm breath. Edric opened his eyes fully this time. He lifted his head and looked toward the door. His ears pricked forward. A low sound came from his throat. Not a growl, only a soft question. He waited, listening. Aelith knelt beside him. She smoothed the fur along his neck. "Soon," she murmured. "He will come soon." The hound blinked slowly. His tail moved once across the floor. Once, and then he lowered his head again. But his eyes stayed half open, watching the door. She rose and crossed to the small window. She breathed on the frost-covered horn pane. The mist bloomed, then slowly cleared in a circle the size of her palm. Through it she could see only white, endless, soft white, and the faint outline of the low roof of the byre where the 2 goats and the cow slept. No light showed there. The animals would be huddled together, chewing their cud in the dark, their breath steaming in the cold. Aelith stepped back. She took the wooden bowl from the table and carried it to the corner, where a small barrel stood. She lifted the lid. Inside, rainwater from autumn had been kept, clear and cold. She dipped the bowl and brought it back to the fireside. Setting it near the hearth, she let the water warm slowly. Later, she would add a handful of dried mint leaves for Godwin's return. The fire spoke again, small pops, gentle sighs. 1 log shifted and sent up a brief shower of sparks. They rose toward the thatch, bright for a breath, then gone. The smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, finding its way out through the louvered opening high in the roof. Aelith sat once more. She picked up the spindle. The wool waited patiently on the distaff. She drew out a fresh length. Thinner this time, finer. The twist ran smooth and sure. She let the spindle hang and turn, turn, until it slowed, then caught it gently and wound the new thread onto the growing bobbin. Outside, the snow kept falling. It covered the thatch in thicker layers. It drifted against the walls until the lower stones disappeared beneath white curves. It blanketed the woodpile so that tomorrow Godwin would have to brush the snow away before he could reach the logs. The hen under the bed gave a single soft cluck. Dreamy. Content. Edric's breathing deepened again. The candle flame held steady, lower now, but still bright enough to touch the far corners of the small room. Aelith spun on. Draw, twist, drop, catch. The same motion, the same quiet, the same long winter night stretching slow and peaceful before her. The new logs had settled into the fire. Flames licked upward in slow, even strokes, painting the hearthstones with shifting patterns of orange and gold. The heat pressed outward in gentle pulses, warming the rushes on the floor and the hem of Aelith's mantle where it brushed the ground. She let the spindle rest in her lap again. Her fingers were tired now. Not sore, only heavy from the long evening's work. She flexed them once, twice, then folded her hands together and rested them on her knees. The wool on the distaff hung still, waiting like everything else in the room. Edric lifted his head higher this time, his ears turned toward the door. A soft whine rose in his throat, low, hopeful. He pushed himself up onto his front legs, then sat. His tail swept once across the floor in a wide, patient arc. Aelith listened too. Beyond the thick thatch and daub walls came the faintest sound. Not footsteps yet, but the soft crunch of snow under weight. Then silence. Then another crunch, closer. The hound's whine grew a little louder, though still gentle. His eyes fixed on the door. She rose without hurry. Crossing the small room, she lifted the wooden bar from its hooks. The latch moved easily in her hand. She pulled the door inward just enough for a man's shoulders to pass. Cold poured in, sharp and bright, but she did not flinch. Godwin stepped through. Snow clung to his broad shoulders and the hood of his cloak. White dusted his beard and the tops of his boots. He carried a small bundle of firewood under one arm and a limp, hair by the ears in his other hand. His face was red from the cold, eyes bright beneath heavy brows. He stamped once on the threshold. Snow fell from his boots in soft clumps. He ducked his head under the low lintel and stepped fully inside. The door closed behind him with a quiet thud. The latch dropped back into place. Edric was up at once. He pressed close, tail moving steadily now, nose pushing into Godwin's free hand. A low, rumbling sound came from the hound's chest. Greeting, relief, love all at once. Godwin set the firewood down and rubbed the dog's ears with rough, cold fingers. "Easy, old one," he said. His voice was low and calm, roughened by the night air. Aelith stepped forward. She took the hair from his hand and hung it on a wooden peg near the door. The fur was thick and white-dusted, the eyes already closed in peace. She brushed snow from his cloak with quick, gentle sweeps of her palms. Godwin pulled the hood back. His hair was dark and streaked with gray, damp now from melting flakes. He unlaced his boots slowly, set them near the hearth to dry. Stockinged feet left wet prints on the rushes as he moved closer to the fire. He held his hands out to the warmth. Steam rose at once from his chilled skin. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the heat sink in. "Snow's deep already," he said quietly. "Paths will be gone by morning." Aelith nodded. She went to the trestle table and brought the bowl of warmed water. She set it at his feet. He dipped his hands, rubbed them together, then lifted water to his face. The cold left his cheeks in faint pink streaks. She took his cloak and shook the last of the snow outside before hanging it on a peg. Then she returned to the table. She broke one of the oatcakes in half and set both pieces near the fire to warm. The cheese she cut into thick slices with her small knife. The apple she left whole. He liked to hold it first, feel its weight. Godwin sat on the second low stool. The wood creaked under him. Edric settled between them, muzzle resting on Godwin's knee. The hound's eyes half closed again, content now that both his people were near. The fire burned steadily. The candle had sunk lower still. Its flame danced a little as the wick shortened. Wax ran down one side in a slow, clear tear. Aelith sat beside her husband. She passed him the warmed oatcake. He took it, broke off a piece, and offered the first bite to the hound. Edric accepted it gently, lips careful, then licked Godwin's fingers clean. They ate in silence for a time. Only the fire spoke. Small snaps, soft sighs. The snow outside kept falling, layer upon layer, sealing the cottage deeper into winter's quiet embrace. When the oatcake was gone and the cheese finished, Godwin reached for the apple. He turned it in his hands, thumbs tracing the wrinkled skin. He bit once. The sound was sharp and clean in the small room. Juice glistened on his lips. He offered the apple to Aelith. She took a small bite, then passed it back. They shared it slowly, bite by bite, until only the core remained. Godwin set it aside for the goats tomorrow. He leaned back against the wall. His breathing slowed to match the hound's. Aelith drew her mantle closer. The night deepened. The snow fell on. The hearth glowed warm and steady, and the small cottage held them all. Man, woman, hound, hen, fire. Candle in its gentle, timeless peace. The apple core lay on the edge of the trestle table, small and brown now, waiting for morning. Godwin leaned his head back against the rough plaster wall, his eyes half closed. The firelight moved across his face in slow waves. Warm gold on one cheek, soft shadow on the other. Aelith gathered the few crumbs from the oatcakes. She brushed them into her palm and scattered them near the hearth for the hen. The bird stirred under the pallet bed. A quiet rustle of feathers, but did not come out yet. She would find the crumbs at first light and peck them away one by one. Godwin spoke without opening his eyes fully. The snares caught only the one hare. The others were empty. Snow's too deep already for the rabbits to move much. His voice stayed low, almost part of the fire's crackle. Aelith nodded once. She moved to the small chest again. From inside, she took a folded length of clean linen. Old, but mended with tiny, careful stitches. She spread it over the table. Then she lifted the hair down from the peg. Kneeling near the hearth, she laid the hair on the linen. The fur was still cold from the night. She stroked it once, gently, along the back. Then she took her small knife, the blade worn thin from years of use, and began the careful work of skinning. Each cut was slow, precise, no haste. The skin parted from the flesh in soft sheets, leaving the meat clean and pale beneath. She rolled the pelt carefully as she went, saving every scrap for later tanning. The fire warmed her hands as she worked. The hound watched from his place between the stools, head tilted, eyes calm. Godwin opened his eyes now. He watched her hands move. The same hands that spun wool, that mended cloaks, that held his when the nights grew longest. He said nothing. There was no need. The quiet between them was full and kind. When the skin was free, Aelith set it aside on a wooden board. She wiped the knife on a scrap of cloth, then wiped her hands. She wrapped the hare meat loosely in another piece of linen and hung it high on a hook near the rafters, safe from mice, high enough to stay cool through the night. Tomorrow she would joint it, stew some, dry the rest. She rose slowly. Her knees creaked a little. Old winter habit. She pressed her hands to the small of her back for a moment, then straightened. Godwin reached out. He took her hand in his. His fingers were still cool from outside, but warming fast. He held her palm against his cheek. The rough beard brushed her skin. She let her thumb trace the line of his jaw once. Slow. Familiar. They stayed like that for a long breath. The fire popped softly. A spark rose, floated, fell. Edric sighed and stretched his front legs toward the warmth. The hen clucked once, dreamy, content, then settled again. Aelith drew her hand back gently. She went to the corner where a small earthenware jug stood. She tipped it and poured a measure of weak ale into 2 wooden cups. The ale was last autumn's brew, thin, slightly sour, but comforting on a night like this. She carried the cups to the hearth and gave one to Godwin. He took it with both hands. The wood was warm from sitting near the fire all evening. He lifted the cup, drank slowly. The taste moved across his tongue. Faint malt, faint earth. He passed the cup to Aelith. She drank too, small sips, letting the warmth spread inside her. They set the cups down between them on the rushes. Edric lifted his head, sniffed once toward the cups, then lowered it again. No ale for him tonight, only the warmth and the nearness of his people. Outside, the snow had eased for a moment. The flakes fell more slowly now, large, lazy stars drifting down one by one. The wind had died completely. The world beyond the walls held its breath. No owl called, no branch cracked under weight, only silence, thick and white. Aelith picked up the spindle once more, not to work hard now, only to hold it, to feel the familiar weight. She turned it slowly between her fingers. The bobbin of wool gleamed faintly in the firelight. Gray thread wound neat and even. Godwin watched the flames. His breathing matched the rise and fall of the logs as they burned. In, out, the same slow rhythm as the snow outside, as the hound's ribs, as the night itself. The candle was almost gone. Only a small stub remained, its flame tiny but stubborn. Wax had pooled around it in a soft white ring. The light no longer reached the far corners. The room had drawn closer. Smaller, warmer, safer. Aelith set the spindle down beside her. She leaned her head against Godwin's shoulder. He shifted so she fit more comfortably. His arm came around her, slow, heavy, sure. They sat together. Fire, hound, quiet cups, fading candle, snow falling softer now, night folding itself around the cottage like a thick wool blanket. Everything waited, everything rested, everything was exactly where it belonged. The last of the candle flame trembled once, then it drew inward, shrank to a tiny blue heart, and went out. A thin thread of smoke rose from the blackened wick, curled once in the warm air, and vanished. The room grew darker at once, but not cold. The hearth fire still held its steady glow, red coals now more than flame, casting a deeper, softer light across the rushes and the low beams. Aelith rested her head heavier against Godwin's shoulder. His arm stayed around her, warm, solid, unmoving. She could feel the slow beat of his heart through the wool of his tunic, steady as the drip of melting snow from the eaves outside. Godwin shifted only enough to draw a folded blanket from behind the stool. It was thick frieze wool, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and lanolin. He spread it across both their laps. The weight settled like a kind hand, pressing them deeper into stillness. Aelith smoothed the edge with her palm. The weave was coarse but comforting under her fingers. Edric rose slowly to his feet. He turned once in a small circle. Old habit, making sure the rushes were just right, then lowered himself again between them. his back pressed against both sets of legs. Warmth flowed in 3 directions now. Fire to people, people to hound, hound to people, a quiet circle that needed no words. The fire spoke less now. The logs had burned down to a nest of glowing coals. Every so often one would settle with a faint sigh, sending up a single spark that floated high, then faded before it reached the thatch. The heat remained, deep, banked, lasting through the longest hours. Aelith's eyes traced the familiar shapes in the dimness. The hanging onions swayed the tiniest amount when a breath of warm air rose from the hearth. Their papery skins rustled like dry leaves. The bunch of thyme beside them had lost most of its scent over the months, but a faint memory of summer still clung. Godwin's breathing deepened. Not sleep yet, only the edge of it. His hand rested on her knee beneath the blanket, thumb moving once, twice, in the slowest circle, then still. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The night held a perfect hush. No wind stirred the branches. No creature moved in the wood. The thatch above them carried its thick white burden without complaint. Inside the byre, the goats and the cow slept on, their breath frosting the air in soft clouds that no one would see until dawn. Aelith closed her eyes. She listened to the small sounds that remained. The faint crackle deep in the coals, Edric's slow inhalations, the almost silent shift of straw beneath the hen. These were the lullabies of winter. Soft, unchanging, safe. Time slipped forward without hurry. Minutes became hours without anyone marking them. The room stayed warm. The blanket stayed heavy. The hound stayed close. Godwin spoke once, voice so low it might have been part of a dream. Tomorrow we'll clear the path. Feed the beasts. Check the woodpile. Aelith answered without opening her eyes. Tomorrow. The word drifted between them like smoke. Gentle, untroubled. No need to say more. Tomorrow would come in its own time, slow and white and quiet, just like tonight. The coals glowed on. A single log, half burned, broke softly in two. The halves settled closer together. Heat rose again in a warm breath that brushed their faces. Edric gave a long, contented sigh. His paws twitched once, chasing nothing, only remembering. Aelith felt sleep begin to gather at the edges of her mind. It came like the snow earlier, softly, steadily, covering thought after thought until only peace remained. She let her hand rest on Godwin's, their fingers laced without effort. Old habit, old comfort. The cottage held them, walls of wattle and daub, roof of thatch and snow, hearth of oak and patience, everything in its place. Nothing hurried, nothing missing. The night stretched long and gentle. No rush toward morning, only the slow turning of the seasons, the slow burning of the fire, the slow breathing of 3 souls bound by warmth and quiet. And somewhere far above, beyond the thatch and the snow and the bare branches, the stars kept their own silent watch. Steady, distant, calm. The coals had become a single soft bed of red-orange light. No more sharp flames danced upward. Only a deep, steady warmth rose from the hearth, slow and constant, like the breath of the earth itself. The room felt smaller now, closer, safer, wrapped in the gentle darkness that follows a candle's end. Aelith opened her eyes for a moment. The faint glow touched Godwin's face beside her. His head had tipped slightly forward. His mouth parted just enough for slow, even breaths to pass. Sleep had found him quietly, without struggle. She watched the rise and fall of his chest beneath the blanket. Steady, untroubled. She did not move. There was no need. The blanket held them both. The hound pressed warm against their legs. The fire needed nothing more tonight. No new wood, no stirring. It would keep its quiet promise until morning. Edric dreamed again. His paws twitched in small, soft circles. A low, contented sound came from deep in his throat. Half sigh, half memory. Perhaps he ran through green meadows that no longer existed, or lay once more in summer shade with pups long grown and gone. His ears flicked once at nothing. Then stillness returned. Aelith let her gaze drift upward. The rafters were black with years of smoke. Thin lines of soot traced the beams like old rivers on a map. Hanging from one nail was the small iron hook where the cooking pot usually swung. Tonight it rested empty beside the hearth, turned upside down to keep dust from settling inside. She thought of the morning ahead, not with worry, only with the calm knowing of what must be done. Rise slowly, clear ashes from the hearth, feed the fire fresh kindling, check the goats and the cow, sweep snow from the door, melt snow for water if the barrel ran low. Simple tasks, slow tasks, the same every winter day. The thought brought no hurry. Morning would arrive when it arrived. The snow would lie thick and untouched. The wood would wait. The animals would low softly when they heard footsteps. Everything in its time. A faint creak sounded overhead, the thatch settling under its white weight. A small drift of snow slipped from the eaves. Outside, soft thump against frozen ground. Then silence again, deeper than before. Aelith closed her eyes once more. She let her breathing match Godwin's. In, out, in, out. The blanket rose and fell with them. Warmth flowed between their bodies, between them and the hound, between all of them and the sleeping fire. A single quiet current, unbroken. Memories drifted in like snowflakes, light, unhurried. The first winter they spent in this cottage. Younger then, the roof newly thatched, the hearth stones still sharp-edged underfoot, nights colder but the same fire, the same hound pup curled between them, smaller, warmer, full of restless energy. Now he slept deeper. Now they slept deeper. Time had softened the edges of everything. She felt no sadness in the remembering, only gentleness. The years had passed slowly, one quiet season into the next. No rush, no loss that could not be held in open hands. The coals gave a single soft pop. A last tiny spark rose, brighter than the rest, climbed halfway to the thatch, then faded into nothing. The glow dimmed by the smallest measure. Still enough, always enough. Aelith turned her head just enough to rest her cheek against Godwin's shoulder. The wool of his tunic smelled of snow and pine resin and faint sweat from the walk home. Familiar, safe. She let the scent fill her lungs once, twice, then breathed it out slowly. Sleep gathered closer now. It wrapped around her thoughts, the way the blanket wrapped her. Body, soft, heavy, kind. No dreams waited, yet only darkness, warm and empty, ready to receive her. Outside, the night held perfect stillness. The snow-covered world lay hushed under its white quilt. Trees stood patient. Paths waited to be found again. The small cottage waited too. Walls steady, roof strong, hearth alive in its quiet way. 3 heartbeats moved together under one roof. Slow, even, peaceful, and the longest part of the night slipped past without notice. Gentle, unmarked, tender as new-fallen snow. The deepest part of the night had arrived. No sound came from beyond the walls. The snow lay thick and undisturbed, sealing the world in white silence. Inside the cottage, time seemed to pause, holding its breath along with the sleeping fire, the sleeping hound, the sleeping people. Aelith drifted between wakefulness and sleep. Her thoughts floated lightly, like flakes that had stopped falling. She pictured the morning light, pale gray at first, creeping through the frost on the hornpane. She pictured Godwin rising before her, stirring the coals back to small flames, setting water to heat. She pictured herself following, feet cold on the rushes until she reached the hearth again. Simple pictures, gentle ones, no hurry in any of them. Godwin's breathing stayed deep and even. His hand still rested on hers beneath the blanket, fingers loose now, relaxed in sleep. The calluses on his palm, hard from axe and snare and spade, felt soft in this moment, familiar roughness made smooth by years and warmth. Edric shifted once. He stretched his hind legs straight behind him, toes spreading, then drew them back in. A long, slow breath escaped through his nose, warm air stirring the fine hairs on his muzzle. He settled again, heavier against their legs, deeper into rest. The brindled fur along his back rose and fell in the same slow rhythm as the coals. Faint glow. Aelith let her mind wander to the small things waiting for daylight. The 2 goats would greet her with soft bleats when she opened the byre door. Their breath would cloud in the cold air. She would fork fresh straw into their pen, shake out the old, check their water. The cow would stand patiently while she milked. Slow streams into the wooden pail, warm and white and steaming. The milk would be carried inside, strained through clean cloth, set near the hearth to keep from freezing. These thoughts came without effort. They passed through her like the warmth from the blanket. Comforting, unremarkable, necessary. No worry attached to any of them. Winter days were long in tasks, but short in worry. Everything had its place. Everything would be done in its turn. The hearth gave a single quiet sigh. One coal crumbled inward, sending a brief pulse of heat outward. The glow brightened for a heartbeat. Soft orange touching the blanket, the hound's fur, Godwin's closed eyelids, then dimmed again to the same steady red. Enough light to see shapes, enough warmth to last until dawn. Aelith felt sleep pull at her more strongly now. It rose like slow water, covering her ankles, her knees, her chest. She did not fight it. She welcomed it the way she welcomed the blanket, the fire, the nearness of her husband and hound. Her eyelids grew heavier. The darkness behind them was kind. Black velvet, warm at the edges. No dreams waited on the other side yet. Only rest. Deep, dreamless rest. The kind that winter nights were made for. The kind that restored without asking anything in return. Outside, a single branch, heavy with snow, gave way at last. It fell with a muffled thump. Soft, far away. Snow slid from other branches in its wake, small avalanches that whispered down to the ground. Then silence returned, thicker, purer. The wood stood patient once more. Inside, nothing stirred. The blanket rose and fell with 3 sets of lungs. The rushes lay still beneath them. The hanging onions and thyme waited in their places. The empty candle pricket held only a stub of wick and a ring of hardened wax. Aelith's last waking thought was simple. Tomorrow the snow would glitter under weak sunlight. Tomorrow the path would be cleared, one slow shovelful at a time. Tomorrow the fire would burn brighter, the kettle would sing. The day would unfold without rush. She let the thought go. It drifted away like smoke through the louver high in the roof. Sleep took her fully then, gentle, complete, without ripple or start. The cottage slept with her. Walls, roof, hearth, hound, man, woman, all wrapped in the same long, peaceful night, all waiting together for the slow return of light. Dawn came without announcement. A faint gray light began to seep through the frost on the hornpane. Slow, pale, almost reluctant, The room remained dim, wrapped still in the night's warmth. The coals in the hearth glowed with the same quiet red they had held for hours, steady, patient, waiting to be stirred awake. Aelith woke first. She did not move at once. She lay beneath the blanket, eyes half open, letting the new light find her. Her cheek rested against Godwin's shoulder. His breathing stayed deep and even. Sleep holding him a little longer. Edric stirred beside them, lifted his head, blinked slowly at the window, then lowered his muzzle again with a soft huff. She eased herself up carefully. The blanket slipped from her lap. Cool air touched her arms at once, though the room held most of its heat from the night. She drew her mantle closer around her shoulders. Her feet found the rushes, cold at first, then warmer near the hearth as she stepped closer. Kneeling, she took the iron poker. She raked the ashes gently aside. Beneath them, the coals still lived, bright orange hearts under gray dust. She gathered them into a small pile with the tip of the poker. Then, from the kindling basket, she chose 3 thin sticks of dry hazel. She laid them across the coals in a careful triangle, a breath from her lips. Soft, steady, coaxed the first small flame. It licked upward along one stick, caught, spread to the others. Tiny crackles filled the quiet. Smoke rose in thin curls, finding its familiar path upward. The new fire spoke gently, waking the room piece by piece. Aelith sat back on her heels, labs pipetting drop by drop. Ballots checked pen steady. The smoke wove on. Heat brushed her face again. Welcome after the night's slow cooling. She added 2 thicker pieces of oak. They settled with soft pops. The glow spread farther, touching the walls, the trestle table, the folded blankets on the pallet bed. Godwin stirred. He opened his eyes slowly. For a moment he looked at the ceiling beams, then at her. A small smile moved beneath his beard. Quiet, sleepy. He pushed himself up to sitting. The blanket pooled around his waist. Edric rose too, stretched long and low, back arching, then shook himself once. His tags jingled faintly in the morning hush. "Morning," Godwin said, voice rough from sleep. "Morning," Aelith answered. No more words needed yet. They sat together a little longer, watching the fire strengthen, feeling the day begin without hurry. Aelith rose first. She crossed to the door and lifted the latch. Cold air rushed in, crisp, clean, carrying the sharp scent of fresh snow. Outside, the world had turned white overnight. The path was buried. The low stone wall had softened into gentle curves. The trees stood silent under heavy branches. No tracks marked the ground, except the faint hollow where Godwin had stepped the night before, already half filled. She closed the door against the chill. Then she went to the barrel in the corner. A thin skin of ice had formed on top. She broke it with the wooden dipper, filled a small kettle, and carried it to the hearth. The water hissed as it met the iron. Soon it would warm, slowly, for washing, for tea, for the day's beginning. Godwin stood. He stretched his arms upward until his back gave a soft crack. Then he pulled on his boots, still stiff from drying overnight, and laced them. He took his cloak from the peg, shook it once, and draped it over his shoulders. "I'll clear the path," he said. "Feed the beasts after." Aelith nodded. "I'll milk first. The goats will be restless." He opened the door. Cold poured in again. Edric slipped out ahead of him, paws sinking into the snow at once. The hound paused, sniffed the air, then bounded forward in joyful arcs, snow flying around him in soft clouds. Godwin followed more slowly, boots crunching through the fresh layer. He took the wooden shovel that leaned against the wall outside and began the patient work. Scoop, lift, toss aside, each motion deliberate. no rush. The path would open in its own time. Aelith watched from the doorway for a moment. Then she closed it gently. She turned back to the room. The fire burned brighter now, small flames dancing along the new logs. Steam began to rise from the kettle's spout. Thin, wavering. She went to the pallet bed. She lifted the folded blankets one by one, shook them gently, then laid them across the chest to air. Beneath the bed, the hen emerged at last, fluffing her feathers, clucking softly. Aelith scattered the last crumbs from the night before. The bird pecked them up one by one, slow, contented. The kettle sang, low at first, then higher. Aelith lifted it from the hook with a thick cloth. She poured a little hot water into the wooden bowl, added a pinch of dried mint from the rafters. The scent rose at once, clean, green, comforting. She carried the bowl to the table and set it there to steep. Outside, the shovel scraped steadily against frozen ground. Edric barked once, joyful, muffled by snow. The day had begun, slow, white, peaceful. The cottage filled with gentle sounds. Fire crackling, kettle cooling, hen scratching, distant shovel. Everything moving forward without haste. Everything exactly as it should be. The kettle had cooled enough to touch. Aelith wrapped her hands around its iron sides. The warmth lingered in the metal. Comforting, steady. She carried it to the trestle, table, and poured the mint-scented water into 2 wooden cups. Steam rose in thin, lazy spirals that caught the growing light from the window. She set 1 cup near Godwin's usual place. The other she held in both hands, letting the heat seep into her palms. She stood a moment by the table, watching the pale steam curl and vanish. The scent of mint filled the small room. Clean, green, a quiet promise of spring still far away. Outside, the shovel scraped on, slow rhythm. Pause. Scrape again. Godwin worked without haste. Each scoop of snow lifted and tossed to the side, built the path little by little. Edric bounded ahead, then back, pause, leaving deep prints that filled almost at once with fresh white. His breath puffed out in joyful clouds. Aelith set her cup down. She took her own cloak from the peg. Thicker wool, hooded, patched at the shoulders from years of carrying wood and straw. She fastened the wooden toggle at her throat. Then she lifted the milking stool and the small wooden pail from beside the door. She stepped outside. The cold met her like an old friend. Sharp, but not unkind. Snow crunched under her boots. The air tasted clean, almost sweet with frost. The sky above was pale gray, heavy with more snow yet to fall, but for now the flakes held back. The byre stood only a dozen paces away. Its low thatched roof carried its own white burden. Smoke rose thin and straight from the small vent in the wall. No fire inside, only the warmth of animals breathing together. Aelith pushed the door open. It scraped across frozen straw. Inside the byre, the darkness was softer. The 2 goats lifted their heads from the manger. Their eyes gleamed in the faint light that slipped through cracks in the walls. One bleated once, low, questioning. The cow stood in the far corner, chewing slowly, her breath steaming in long white plumes. Aelith set the stool beside the cow. She spoke softly as she worked. Old habit. Words without meaning, only tone. Easy now, easy. The cow shifted her weight once, then stood still. Aelith ran her hand along the warm flank. The hide was rough, winter thick. She placed the pail beneath the udder and began. The first streams hit the wood with a soft ring. Warm milk foamed slightly at the edges. The sound was steady. Squirt, 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 filling the pail in slow measure. The cow's tail flicked lazily once, brushing Aelith's shoulder. She smiled without looking up. The goats watched from their side. One stretched her neck toward the pail. Aelith shook her head gently. Not yet. Your turn after. The goat huffed and returned to nibbling at the last of the hay. When the pail was half full, Aelith rose. She carried it carefully back to the cottage door and set it just inside to stay warm. Then she returned with fresh straw forked from the stack. She spread it thick in the stalls, clean yellow beneath the animals' feet. The goats stepped aside politely, then settled into the new bedding with small, contented grunts. The cow lowed once, soft, grateful. Aelith patted her neck. Good girl. She checked the water trough. Ice skimmed the top again. She broke it with the back of the fork, then promised herself to carry hot water from the hearth later. Back inside the cottage, the fire had grown brighter. Flames moved steadily along the logs now. Heat filled the room in gentle waves. Godwin had returned. Boots stamped clean at the threshold. Cloak hung to dry. Snow still melted from his beard in tiny drops. He stood near the hearth, warming his hands. Edric shook himself once more at the door. Snow flying in all directions. Then padded to his place on the rushes and lay down with a long sigh. Aelith strained the milk through a clean linen cloth into a wider earthenware bowl. She set it near the fire to settle. Cream would rise slowly through the morning. Later she would skim it for butter, or leave it for drinking thick and rich. Godwin took his cup of mint water. He drank slowly, eyes on the flames. Paths open to the woodpile, he said. Enough for today. Aelith nodded. She sat on her stool again. The milking had left her hands warm, fingers loose. She picked up the spindle without thinking. Old rhythm returning at once, draw, twist, drop, catch. The morning light strengthened behind the frosted pane. Pale gray turned to soft silver. Shadows shortened across the floor. The hen scratched in the corner, finding stray crumbs. The fire spoke in calm, even tones. 2 people, 1 hound, 1 hen, a small fire, a pail of milk, a path newly cleared. The day unfolded slowly, white, quiet, unhurried, exactly as winter days were meant to be. The morning light had strengthened enough to touch the far wall now. Pale silver slipped through the frosted pane, turning the frost patterns into faint, glittering webs. The room no longer needed the fire alone for sight, though the hearth still gave its warm heart to every corner. Flames moved steadily along the logs, crackling in soft, contented voices. Aelith set the spindle aside once more. The bobbin had grown heavier. Overnight and through the early tasks, gray wool wound neat and even. She placed it carefully on the small shelf beside the empty candle pricket. Later, she would wind it onto a larger skein, ready for the loom when the days lengthened again. Godwin finished his mint water. He set the cup down with a quiet wooden clink. Then he rose, stretched once more, arms high, back arching before crossing to the door. He pulled on his gloves, thick leather, worn soft at the palms, and took the shovel again. I'll fetch more wood, he said. Enough to see us through tomorrow. Aelith nodded. She watched him step out. The door opened to a bright white world. Snow reflected the weak sun so sharply that it almost hurt the eyes. Godwin's figure darkened against it. Broad shoulders, slow steps. Then the door closed behind him with its familiar thud. Edric followed to the threshold. He paused there, nose lifted to the cold air, then padded back inside and settled near the hearth again. His brindled coat caught the firelight in warm streaks. He rested his head on his paws, eyes half closed, content to watch the flames while his people worked. Aelith went to the pail of milk. The cream had risen in a thick, pale layer across the top. She skimmed it carefully with a flat wooden spoon, collecting the rich foam into a smaller bowl. butter tomorrow, perhaps, or clotted cream to spread on oat cakes when the next batch baked. She covered the skimmed milk with a clean cloth and set it near the window where the cold would keep it sweet. She swept the rushes near the door. The broom was old, birch twigs bound tight with twine. It whispered across the floor, gathering stray snow that had melted into damp patches. Bits of straw, a few crumbs the hen had missed. She worked slowly, long strokes, no rush. The sound was soothing, like rain on thatch far away. When the floor was tidy again, she knelt by the hearth. She fed it 2 more logs, smaller ones this time, to keep the fire even rather than fierce. The new wood caught quickly. Heat bloomed outward in gentle waves. She sat back on her heels a moment, watching the flames find their shape. Yellow tips danced along the bark, then settled into steady red hearts. The hen clucked softly from her corner. She had finished the crumbs and now pecked at bits of grit near the wall. Tiny stones she needed to grind her food. Aelith smiled at the small sounds. Life moved in these quiet ways. Hen scratching, fire burning, milk settling, snow lying thick outside. Godwin returned sooner than she expected. He carried an armful of split logs, dry oak, bark still clinging in places. Snow dusted his shoulders and hood again. He stamped at the threshold, then stepped inside. Edric rose at once, tail sweeping wide arcs across the rushes. Godwin stacked the wood beside the hearth. Neat rows, each log placed with care so none would roll. He brushed snow from his sleeves, then hung his cloak once more. His cheeks were red from the cold, breath still visible for a moment in the warmer air. He rubbed his hands together near the flames. "Enough for 2 days now," he said. "Maybe 3 if we're sparing." Aelith rose and poured fresh water into the kettle from the barrel. She hung it over the fire again. Soon it would heat for washing, or for a thin pottage if hunger came before noon. She added another pinch of mint, more for comfort than flavor. The scent drifted upward, mingling with wood smoke and the faint sweetness of milk. They sat together again, 2 low stools drawn close to the hearth. Edric lay between them, heavy and warm. Godwin's hand rested on the hound's back, slow strokes along the spine. Aelith picked up her spindle once more, though she spun only a little. Mostly she held it. Mostly she watched the fire. The day moved forward without hurry. Light grew behind the window. Snow sparkled outside. Inside, warmth held steady. Tasks waited, small ones, gentle ones, but none pressed. They spoke little. Words were not needed. The fire spoke for them. The hound sighed for them. The slow turning of the spindle marked time in soft whispers. Winter held the cottage gently. Snow lay deep and peaceful beyond the walls. The path stayed open just enough. The animals rested in their byre. The milk waited. The wool waited. Everything rested in its place. And the quiet hours stretched long and kind. Simple, slow, deeply calm. The pale winter sun had climbed as high as it would go. Its light came thin and slanting through the small horn window, turning the frost into a soft, glowing veil. Shadows stretched long across the rushes, gentle, unhurried. The fire burned low again, coals nestling close together, giving steady warmth without haste. Aelith set the spindle down for the last time that morning. The bobbin rested full beside its sisters on the shelf. Gray wool spun fine and even, waiting for the loom when the days grew longer. She rubbed her hands together slowly. The wool had left them smooth and faintly scented. She felt no tiredness, only the quiet satisfaction of work done without rush. Godwin sat with his back to the wall, legs stretched toward the hearth. His boots stood drying near the fire, leather softened by heat. laces loose. Edric lay across his feet, heavy and content, one paw twitching now and then in a dream of summer runs. Godwin's hand rested on the hound's head. Slow strokes from ears to neck, the same motion repeated without thought. Aelith rose and went to the trestle table. She broke the last oatcake into 3 pieces, one for each of them, one small for the hen. She warmed the pieces, near the coals until the edges crisped. Again, and the faint scent of oats rose sweet. She passed one to Godwin. He took it with a small nod, broke off a corner, and offered it first to Edric. The hound accepted gently, lips careful, then licked Godwin's fingers clean. They ate in silence, small bites, slow chewing. The oatcake crumbled softly between teeth. The mint water had cooled in the cups. They sipped what remained. Faint green taste lingering on the tongue. Outside, the snow lay brilliant under the weak sun. No wind stirred it. No bird called from the bare branches. Only light, falling quiet and steady across the white world. When the oatcake was gone, Aelith gathered the crumbs. She scattered them near the pallet bed. The hen emerged at once, fluffing feathers, pecking with small, precise movements. Each crumb disappeared in turn. The bird clucked once, soft, satisfied, then returned to her nest of straw. Godwin spoke after a long quiet. "Afternoon will bring more snow. Maybe." His voice stayed low, part of the room's calm. Aelith looked toward the window. Likely. No worry in the word, only knowing. The sky held the promise of more white. Gentle, patient, falling when it chose. She crossed to the door and opened it a hand's width. Cold air slipped in, clean, bright. She breathed it deeply. The path Godwin had cleared gleamed smooth now, edges softening as sun touched them. Beyond it, the wood stood silent, branches heavy, snow curving along every line. The byre roof carried its thick white cap without complaint. She closed the door gently. The latch dropped with its small wooden sound. Inside, the fire welcomed her back, warm breath brushing her skirts as she passed. Aelith returned to her stool. She drew the blanket across her lap again, though the room stayed warm. Godwin shifted closer. Their shoulders touched. Edric sighed between them. Long, deep, content. The day drifted onward. Light moved slowly across the floor. Shadows lengthened without hurry. The fire spoke in whispers. Small pops. Soft sighs. Milk waited in its bowl. Wood waited in its stack. Wool waited on its shelf. Everything rested in place. No tasks pressed now. No need to hurry toward evening. The light would fade when it faded. The fire would be fed again when it needed feeding. Night would return, long, quiet, peaceful, wrapping the cottage once more in its gentle dark. Aelith leaned her head against Godwin's shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair. His hand found hers beneath the blanket, fingers laced without effort. Old habit, old comfort. They sat together, fire glowing, hound breathing, and dreaming, snow lying thick beyond the walls. The winter day held them softly, slow, simple, deeply calm, and in that quiet, timeless space, between one breath and the next, the small cottage waited, warm and whole, for whatever the season chose to bring next. The story has now reached its gentle end. Thank you for listening all the way through this quiet winter night in the medieval English cottage. If the calm of Aelith and Godwin's simple days stayed with you, please leave a like to help the story reach others who need rest tonight. And if you'd like more slow, peaceful historical journeys like this one, subscribe to Mind Lipic, so these soft tales can find you again when the world feels loud. Wherever you are drifting off, perhaps still in the USA, UK, Canada, or somewhere new tonight, Thank you for sharing your city or country in the comments last time. Reading them makes these evenings feel a little less alone. Now, let the last embers fade in your mind. Let your breathing slow to match the hounds. Let the snow cover every thought until only peace remains. Sleep deeply. Rest well. Good night.